At me. You think reading big books makes you better? Your father was a poor man, and you will die a poor man. Sergeant, drag him away!
The iron handcuffs felt shockingly cold against David's wrists. It was 3 a.m., and the Lagos rain was pouring down in heavy, blinding sheets, turning the clean asphalt of Silverwood Estate into a dark mirror. "Move your useless legs," Sergeant Bala barked, shoving David from behind. David stumbled, his cheap rubber boots slipping on the wet driveway. Around him stood the wealthy residents of Block B, shielded from the downpour by large golf umbrellas held by their domestic staff. None of them looked at David's face. They only looked at his uniform. To them, the navy blue jacket with the faded silver patch on the shoulder was not a garment worn by a human being. It was simply a signpost that read, "Property of the underclass." "I knew it," a woman whispered loudly, adjusting her silk nightgown. "These night guards are all the same. You bring them into a luxury estate in Lekki to watch your property, and they use the night to watch what they can steal." "He looked too quiet to be innocent," another added. Standing at the center of the crowd was Chief Anthony Cole. Anthony did not need an umbrella. His driver held a massive black one over his head, ensuring not a single drop of rain touched his tailored agbada. Anthony's face was twisted in deep disgust. He stepped forward, his polished leather shoes splashing rainwater onto David's trousers. "Look at me, boy," Anthony commanded, his voice cutting through the heavy sound of the rain. David kept his head down, staring at the wet ground. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, but he forced his breathing to remain steady. "I said, look at me," Anthony shouted, stepping closer. He reached out and violently grabbed David's chin, forcing the young man's face upward. "You see this face? I told management that hiring boys from the mainland without background checks was a mistake. You see that gold watch you stole? That watch can buy your entire family's future twice over. Where did you hide it?" "Sir, I did not touch your watch," David said. His voice was remarkably calm, though his lips trembled slightly from the biting cold. "I was at the back gate, checking the water pumps, when your apartment was opened. The logbook shows—" "Shut your mouth!" Anthony spat, slapping David across the cheek. The slap echoed sharply through the rainy night. "You think you are smart because you are always holding those thick books in the security post? You think reading big books makes you a human being? You are a common guard. Your father was likely a poor man, and you will die a poor man. Sergeant, take him away. Let him rot in the cell until he speaks the truth." As the police officers dragged David toward the waiting patrol van, someone in the crowd held up a smartphone. The bright flash of the camera cut through the darkness. The resident was recording a video, laughing quietly. David knew what would happen next. By morning, his face would be on blogs and social media platforms with the caption, "Lekki security guard caught stealing boss's $1,000,000 watch." The police van door slammed shut, plunging David into total darkness. As the vehicle bounced violently over the potholes of the alternative route leading out of Lekki, David sat in the dark, his hands tightly locked in iron. He did not cry. Instead, he closed his eyes and began to mentally recite the provisions of Section 36 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. He had chosen law because he wanted to understand justice. Tonight, he was learning exactly what injustice felt like. 6 months before that terrible night, David's life had been a daily battle for survival between the mainland and the island. He lived in a tiny single-room apartment in Yaba, a place where the walls were permanently damp, and the sound of yellow commercial buses, the Times Danfos, Times woke him up at 4 a.m. every morning. David was 24 years old, tall, with broad shoulders from years of carrying heavy water buckets in his village before moving to Lagos. He had a brilliant mind, a sharp memory, and a dream that everyone in his neighborhood considered foolish. He wanted to be a lawyer. Against all odds, he had completed his university degree by working 3 different menial jobs. But the real hurdle was the Nigerian law school. The tuition fees were enormous, and the cost of textbooks was a mountain he could not seem to climb. To bridge the financial gap, David took the night guard job at Silverwood Estate in Lekki. The salary was modest, but the job offered him one precious thing: quiet hours between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. when the wealthy residents were asleep. Every evening, David would board a crowded bus from Yaba, fighting through the thick, suffocating traffic of the Third Mainland Bridge. The air in the bus would be hot and sticky, filled with the smell of sweat, fried plantains from roadside cellars, and exhaust fumes. He would arrive in Lekki by 6 p.m., wash his face in the staff bathroom, put on his crisp security uniform, and take his position at the massive iron gates. The residents of Silverwood Estate were the elite of Lagos. They drove sleek Mercedes-Benz SUVs, Range Rovers, and sports cars that purred like satisfied cats. They lived in white, flat-roofed mansions with glass walls that showed off their expensive Italian furniture. To these people, David was simply a part of the landscape, like the security gate itself or the palm trees lined up along the driveway. "Oya, open the gate quickly. Are you sleeping?" A young man in a gold chain would yell from his sports car, playing loud music that shook the ground. David would pull the heavy iron lever immediately, bow slightly, and say, "Welcome home, sir." The driver would speed past without a glance, leaving David in a cloud of expensive perfume and exhaust smoke. Some residents were worse. A group of young girls living in Block C once stopped near his post while waiting for an Uber. They noticed David reading a thick volume of criminal law under the dim fluorescent bulb of the security house. "Look at this one of them said, pointing her phone at him while recording a video for TikTok. "The gatekeeper wants to be an advocate." Imagine going to court and seeing your security guard standing as your lawyer. "My lord, I opened the gate for the suspect." They all burst into loud laughter. David did not look up from his book. He simply turned the page, his eyes fixed on the text. He had learned early in life that pride was a luxury a poor man could not afford. His dignity was not in his uniform, it was in his mind. But Chief Anthony Cole was a different kind of storm. Anthony was a corporate businessman who owned a major logistics firm in the Lagos Island business district. He was a short, heavily built man who walked with an aggressive stride, as if he owned the earth he walked upon. Anthony hated seeing David read. Every time Anthony drove through the gate and saw David with a textbook, he would stop his car, roll down his tinted window, and hiss loudly. "You, this boy, why are you always deceiving yourself?" Anthony asked one hot afternoon while waiting for his houseboy to bring a document to the gate. "Look at your life. Look at your uniform. You think by carrying these big books you will suddenly become a big man? God has already shared the destinies of this world. Some of us are born to ride in the back of a luxury car, and people like you are born to open the gate for us. Accept your place and focus on the gate before robbers enter my house." "I am just preparing for my exams, Chief," David replied softly, his hands behind his back. "Exams?" Anthony laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Even if you pass, who will hire you? Which major law firm will look at a former security guard and give him a desk?" "Look at my shoes, young man. They cost more than your salary for 3 years. That is what we call reality. Stop dreaming." David kept his peace. He remembered his grandmother's words back in the village. "The dog that barks at a moving train is only wasting its breath. The train will still reach its destination." Then came the night of the storm. Anthony had returned home furious after a business deal went sour on the mainland. He had slammed his car door, marched into his penthouse apartment, and realized his gold Rolex watch, a rare piece worth millions, was missing from his dresser. Instead of checking his car or considering that he might have left it at his Victoria Island office, his mind went straight to the quiet boy at the gate who read law books. Anthony called the estate chairman. He called the police. Within 30 minutes, David was pulled out of the security post. His small locker was turned upside down. His few clothes were thrown into the dirt. His law textbooks were kicked across the floor, their pages tearing in the damp air. Nothing was found. "He has hidden it outside," Anthony screamed, his eyes red with rage. "He is a thief. Look at him. He cannot even look me in the eye." The estate management, terrified of losing Anthony's massive annual maintenance fees, did not defend their worker. They stood by as the police slapped David, threw his books into the mud, and dragged him away in handcuffs. David spent 2 weeks in a cramped, dark police cell in Surulere. The room smelled of old sweat, urine, and fear. He shared the small space with 15 other men. There was no bed. They slept on the bare concrete floor, taking turns to sit down when the space became too tight. Every day, the police officers interrogated him, demanding he reveal where he had sold the watch. Every day, David gave the same answer: "I did not take it." On the 15th day, the door of the cell opened. A different police inspector walked in, looking embarrassed. He ordered the guards to unlock David's handcuffs. "You are free to go," the inspector said, not looking David in the eye. "What happened, sir?" David asked, his voice hoarse from 2 weeks of drinking dirty tap water. Chief Anthony's driver confessed. The inspector grunted, shuffling some papers on his desk. The driver stole the watch 3 days before the incident and sold it to a buyer in Ikeja. He confessed, "When we picked him up for another matter. You are cleared." David stood in the police station courtyard, the bright Lagos sun stabbing his eyes after days of darkness. His uniform was torn and stained with grease. His body was weak, and his ribs ached from the rough treatment he had received. He took a commercial bus back to Silverwood Estate to collect his remaining belongings. When he arrived, the estate manager refused to let him pass the outer barrier. "Your belongings are in this sack," the manager said coldly, tossing a black garbage bag over the gate. "Management has decided to terminate your employment. We cannot have people who are associated with police trouble working here. It ruins our image." "But I was proven innocent," David said, his voice steady but deep with emotion. The driver took it. "It doesn't matter," the manager replied, turning away. "Lekki is for peace and security. Find somewhere else." I. David looked past the manager's shoulder. He saw Chief Anthony Cole's massive Range Rover driving slowly down the estate road. The car stopped near the gate. The tinted window rolled down halfway. Anthony looked at David standing on the hot asphalt outside the gate, holding a black garbage bag filled with torn textbooks and dirty clothes. Anthony did not say a word. He did not apologize. He simply rolled the window back up and hissed, his car accelerating onto the main road, splashing a puddle of dirty water near David's feet. David watched the car disappear into the heavy Lekki traffic. He adjusted his grip on the black plastic bag, turned his back to the estate, and began the long walk toward the bus stop. He did not feel anger. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. The world did not owe him an apology, and it would never give him justice based on pity. He had to build his own fortress of justice, where no man could ever slap him again. The next 7 years were a blur of sweat, sleepless nights, and absolute sacrifice. David moved back to the mainland permanently, taking up a daytime job as a delivery rider for a logistics company in Ikeja. The work was brutal. Lagos traffic was an angry animal. He rode his small motorcycle through the scorching afternoon heat that made his skin peel, through torrential downpours that soaked him to the bone, and through the thick dust of the Harmattan season. He navigated the dangerous highways of the Apapa Port District, dodging reckless container trucks and corrupt traffic officials who constantly tried to extort him. Every kobo he made was divided into 3 parts: a tiny portion for dry bread and beans, a portion for his shared room rent, and the largest portion for his law school fees and books. While other young men went to bars on Friday nights to drink beer and watch football, David sat under the street lamps of Yaba College of Technology when his room had no electricity. He would sit on a stone, swatting away mosquitoes, his eyes burning as he read corporate law, financial regulations, and civil procedure. He memorized cases, analyzed judgments, and sharpened his mind like a machete. His efforts were not in vain. David did not just pass the Nigerian law school. He finished in the top 1% of his graduating class, winning 3 prestigious national awards for excellence in corporate law and advocacy. On the day he was called to the Nigerian bar, David stood in the Grand Hall in Abuja, wearing his black gown and his bright white wig. He looked at his hands. They were still rough from his years as a delivery rider and a security guard, but today those hands held a certificate that no rich man could buy with money. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks to his ancestors. The train had reached its destination. David returned to Lagos and was instantly hired by Williams & Partners, a premium, high-octane law firm located in a towering glass high-rise in the Lagos Island business district. The firm handled the most complex financial crime, asset recovery, and corporate fraud cases in West Africa. Within 4 years at the firm, David became a legend. He possessed a unique advantage that other lawyers raised in wealth and privilege did not have. He knew the streets of Lagos. He understood human desperation. And his mind was incredibly disciplined from years of surviving on the edge. In the courtroom, he was calm, methodical, and devastatingly precise. He did not shout. He simply laid out facts and law until the opposing side collapsed under the weight of their own errors. He was no longer the boy at the gate. He was now David Cole-esque, senior associate of the finest firm in the city. Meanwhile, the wheels of karma were turning slowly but surely in the luxury quarters of Lekki. Chief Anthony Cole's life had begun to fracture. The very thing that gave him his arrogance, his massive logistics empire, had become a web of deceit. For years, Anthony had been taking huge credit facilities from international banks, using forged shipping documents and non-existent collateral to secure billions of naira. He believed he was too big to fall. He believed that in Lagos, money could silence any judge and buy any investigator. But the winds changed. A new administration took over the central financial regulatory body, determined to clean up corporate corruption. On a bright Tuesday morning, while Anthony was having breakfast in his Lekki mansion, 3 dark blue SUVs from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, stormed his compound. The heavy iron gates, the same gates David used to open, were pushed aside. Anthony was led out of his house in handcuffs, his expensive silk shirt stained with sweat. The scene was identical to the one 7 years ago, but this time, the man in chains was the billionaire. Within hours, the news flooded the internet. Social media went wild, with graphics of his company logo and headlines reading, "Billionaire logistics mogul arrested in N12 billion fraud scandal." The fallout was immediate and brutal. The central bank froze all of Anthony's personal and corporate bank accounts. His luxury cars were seized and parked at the government facility in Ikoyi. His wealthy friends, the men and women who used to drink expensive champagne with him at the Lagos Yacht Club, suddenly blocked his phone number. When his wife called them weeping, begging for loans to secure his bail, they answered with cold excuses and hung up. "We cannot be associated with a financial terrorism case," one former associate told her before cutting the line. Even worse, the evidence against Anthony was airtight. The prosecution had secured internal emails, bank statements, and confessions from his chief financial officer. It was a legal death sentence. Anthony's family went from one top law firm to another in Victoria Island and Ikoyi. Every senior lawyer they approached took one look at the case file, saw the overwhelming evidence and the intense public interest, and shook their heads. "This is a sinking ship," a prominent senior advocate of Nigeria told Anthony's wife. "If I take this case, it will damage my firm's reputation. Your husband left too many digital footprints. No one can save him from jail." Anthony sat in a cold detention cell in Ikoyi for 3 weeks. His skin became pale, his eyes were sunken, and the weight of his pride had turned into a physical ache in his chest. Every night, as he lay on the thin foam mattress, he thought about his wealth, his cars, and his status. None of it could breathe the fresh air for him. On the 24th day, his younger brother, John, visited the detention facility. John looked exhausted, but had a tiny spark of hope in his eyes. "Anthony, I found someone," John said, leaning close to the glass partition. "I spoke to a director at the central bank. He told me there is only one young lawyer in this entire country who understands the specific loopholes in these new international banking laws. He said this lawyer recently won a similar case for a multinational firm against the government." Anthony gripped the metal bar. "Who is he? What is his name? Give him whatever money he wants. Tell him I will sell my property in London to pay his fees." "His name is David Cole," John said, looking down at a notebook. "He is a senior partner at Williams & Partners. But Anthony, there is a problem." "What problem?" Anthony shouted, his voice cracking. "Money is not a problem. It's not about money." John whispered, looking at his brother with deep pity. "Do you remember the young security guard you had arrested at Silverwood Estate 7 years ago? The boy you accused of stealing your Rolex?" Anthony froze. The air in the visiting room suddenly felt 10 times heavier. His mind rushed back through the years, the rain, the slap, the black garbage bag thrown into the dirt, the young boy standing outside the gate in a torn uniform. "No," Anthony whispered, his face turning completely white. "It cannot be him. It is him." John said softly, "The director told me he went to law school while working nights at your estate. He is the only man who can save you from 20 years in prison, and he is waiting for you." The meeting took place in the private consultation room of the Ikoyi detention facility. Anthony sat at a small wooden table, his hands trembling slightly. The door opened with a soft click, and a man walked in. David was dressed in a flawless, dark charcoal 3-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His silk tie was perfectly knotted, and a gold pen slipped neatly into his breast pocket. He carried a thick leather briefcase. His face was calm, his eyes steady and clear. He looked like peace personified. Anthony looked up, his breath catching in his throat. He looked for any sign of anger in David's face, any small smile of mockery, any spark of revenge. There was none. David's face was a clean slate of pure professionalism. David pulled out a chair, sat down across from Anthony, and opened his briefcase. He took out a thick document and laid it gently on the table. "Good afternoon, Chief Cole," David said. His voice was deep, smooth, and completely respectful. He did not use a sarcastic tone. He spoke as a professional, addressing a client. Anthony could not speak for a long moment. He looked at David's hands, the same hands that had once pulled the heavy iron lever of the Lecky gate for him. "David," Anthony began, his voice shaking violently. He lowered his head, tears finally spilling from his eyes, dropping onto the polished wooden table. I do not know what to say. I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I did to you 7 years ago. I was blind. I was arrogant. I treated you like an animal because I had money. Please, do not use this case to destroy me. Do not let me die in this place." David did not interrupt him. He sat in silence, watching the older man weep. He allowed the silence to fill the room, giving the moment room to breathe. He did not feel a sense of triumph. He only felt a deep, profound sadness for how easily human beings could be deceived by temporary things like wealth. When Anthony's shoulders stopped shaking, David spoke softly. "Chief Cole, look at me," David said. Anthony raised his wet face. "I did not come here today to punish you," David said, his voice calm and reassuring. "The world has already done that. If I wanted revenge, I would have stayed in my office and watched your business collapse from the news. But I am a minister in the temple of justice. My job is not to judge men. My job is to interpret the law." David tapped the document on the table. "I have reviewed your case file. The prosecution made 3 critical procedural errors when they froze your accounts and seized your assets under the new financial acts. They violated your right to a fair hearing before asset forfeiture. I can get the frozen accounts released by next Tuesday, and I can argue for your bail on Wednesday." Anthony gasped, his eyes wide open. You will take my case after everything I did?" "I will take your case because it is my duty," David said, looking straight into Anthony's eyes. "But I will take it on one condition." "Anything. Name it." "You will pay my firm's standard fee," David said. "And when this case is over, regardless of the outcome, you will build a modern, fully funded library for the staff and security workers of Silverwood Estate. Every young man who works there must have access to books, computers, and light to study at night. No man should ever be told that his uniform defines his future." Anthony closed his eyes, fresh tears flowing down his cheeks, and nodded vigorously. "I will do it. I swear to God, David, I will do it. I will do it." David stood up, closing his briefcase with a sharp click. He extended his right hand across the table toward the man who had once slapped him. Anthony looked at the extended hand. He stood up slowly and shook it with both of his hands, bowing his head in deep humility. "Thank you," Anthony whispered. "I will see you in court on Wednesday morning, Chief," David said. He turned and walked toward the door. As David stepped out of the detention facility into the bright Lagos afternoon, the city was alive with its usual energy. The traffic on the Ikoyi Road was moving slowly. The sellers were calling out their wares, and the high-rise glass buildings reflected the beautiful blue sky. David took a deep breath of the warm air. He knew the legal battle ahead would be tough, but he also knew he would win. He had already won the most important battle of his life, the battle against bitterness. He walked toward his car, a quiet smile on his lips. He had proven to himself, to Lagos, and to the world that gold could melt, empires could fall, and wealth could disappear overnight. But a man's dignity, character, education, and perseverance would always stand as an immovable rock against the storms of life.